Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're setting the stage to navigate what is honestly a pretty chaotic, unpredictable, and sometimes downright overwhelming modern business landscape. Have you ever felt like strategic planning is basically just trying to predict the weather while you're standing in the middle of a hurricane? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. The sources we're looking at today are going to equip us with the concepts we actually need to make sense of all this turbulence. So let's just dive right in, shall we? Now, if you're at all familiar with modern management theory, you've probably heard of the VUCA framework. I mean, it's pretty much the gold standard for describing the crazy challenges of our current business environment. But do you truly know what the acronym actually stands for? I hear people confidently say all the time that it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and unclarity. But is that right? Well, we're going to start things off with a major myth-busting moment right out of the gate. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we're looking at strategy in a volatile world. Second, we'll decode the VUCA framework. Third, we're tackling the challenge of ambiguity. And fourth, we'll talk about actually navigating that strategic fog.
All right, Section 1, Strategy in a Volatile World.
So think about strategic planning as this really precarious bridge. On one side, you've got your internal environment, right? Your culture, your human resources, organizational structure, cash flow, all that stuff. But on the other side, the external environment is literally throwing everything at you. We're talking climate shifts, economic swings, massive technological disruptions, legal changes, the whole shebang. Our sources make it clear that professional managers absolutely have to take strategic management seriously precisely because these external forces create constant threats, unexpected opportunities, and just profound uncertainty. You're basically trying to balance your internal capabilities against a world that simply refuses to stand still.
Moving on to Section 2, Decoding the VUCA Framework.
Okay, so here's that myth-busting moment I promised you. Let's settle this once and for all, based strictly on the source texts. The letter A in VUCA does not stand for unclarity. In fact, our sources explicitly point out that unclarity is basically a fabricated term in this context. The true final element of the framework is ambiguity. So it's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And look, knowing the precise terminology here isn't just about winning points at trivia night. It literally changes how we diagnose real-world business problems. Now, before we really zoom in on ambiguity, let's quickly define those first three letters using the precise terms from our sources. First up, volatility. We are living in an increasingly volatile business environment where the sheer speed and magnitude of change are just massive. Second is uncertainty. Sudden changes can happen at any given time, which makes traditional analysis and long-term predicting incredibly difficult. And third, complexity. The business environment is this giant tangled web of interconnected political, economic, social, technological, and legal factors. You pull one string over here and a dozen others move over there. And these three elements, they set the perfect stage for the ultimate challenge. Which brings us to Section 3, the challenge of ambiguity, the final boss of strategy.
The absolutely crucial point here is understanding what ambiguity actually feels like on the ground. Our sources describe circumstances characterized by the, and I'm quoting directly here, diversity of environmental changes, uncertainty, complex and rigid nature of problems. See, ambiguity isn't just a lack of information. It's a lack of clarity about the actual meaning of events. When problems become rigid, it means the cause and effect relationships are totally obscured. They're basically a black box. And if managers misidentify these rigid, ambiguous problems as simple, predictable ones, the real-world stakes are disastrous. They might execute a completely flawless plan that happens to solve entirely the wrong problem. But actually, here's where the sources throw us a really fascinating curveball. Ambiguity isn't strictly a negative force. Think about the concept of causal ambiguity. When a successful firm builds a competitive advantage that's multidimensional, meaning it's based on really complex, interconnected bundles of tangible and intangible resources, it creates causal ambiguity. So what does that actually mean for you? It means even if your rivals desperately want to copy your success, they literally can't figure out exactly how you're doing it. It creates what the sources call uncertain imitation. So viewed in this light, ambiguity actually acts as a powerful competitive shield for successful firms. If they can't understand you, well, they can't copy you. And that leads into Section 4, navigating the strategic fog. When you're facing a full-blown VUCA environment, you can't just guess your way through it. You have to follow a concrete strategic decision-making cycle.
You start by identifying the problem, then you move to processing information, identifying options, isolating a choice, implementing that choice, and, crucially, improving via feedback. It's an iterative loop. Because let's face it, in an ambiguous world, your first choice is probably going to be wrong, or at least slightly off. So that feedback loop, that is your absolute lifeline. Let's zoom in on that information processing step for a second. It relies incredibly heavily on something called environmental scanning. You can think of this as the radar system for strategic management. Our sources point out that as environmental uncertainty increases, your scanning activity has to increase right along with it. You absolutely need this radar to detect non-routine events, gather data, and systematically lower the uncertainty before you even try to isolate a strategic choice.
So how does this radar system actually build into a strategy? Our sources reference the work of Henry Mintzberg, who's a pretty major critic of purely rational, rigid planning. In an ambiguous world, you need a totally new approach. First, you have rational design. That's your traditional, purpose-led planning. Second, you have emergence, which is your creative, flexible response to unfolding circumstances on the ground. Mintzberg suggests the real sweet spot is step 3, planned emergence. This is exactly how managers navigate ambiguous environments. They combine deliberate, overarching goals with the flexibility to just learn and adapt on the fly.
To really cement this idea of planned emergence, the sources provide an absolutely brilliant metaphor. Quote, navigation of the compass, then the specific and detailed map is much more important. Unquote. Think about it. If the terrain is constantly shifting beneath your feet due to volatility, complexity, and ambiguity, a highly detailed map that you drew yesterday is practically useless today. It might even lead you right off a cliff. What you actually need is a compass, a clear strategic intent and direction, coupled with the flexibility to just find a new path when a boulder inevitably rolls into your way. Surviving VUCA requires directional flexibility rather than rigid adherence to some outdated plan.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. Take a hard look at your own organization, or even just the projects you're running right now. Ask yourself, is your strategy a detailed map, bound to fail the second the terrain changes? Or is it a flexible compass, giving you the directional clarity you need to navigate the next wave of ambiguity? Understanding the difference is honestly the key to mastering the VUCA environment. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep that compass handy.